Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Q&A with the Drupal Association staff and board. Hi, I'm Audra Martin Merrick. I'm the chair of the board, and we're really excited that you're all with us today. I'm joined by a couple of folks from the staff and some of my colleagues from the board. We've got Heather Rocker, our executive director, and Tim Lennon, our CTO, who I'm sure you all know. And probably have seen in lots of sessions already during the DrupalCon so far. I hope you've been all having a very good DrupalCon. I'm also joined by some of my colleagues from the board. There's Dries, who I think many of you will probably recognize, as well as Badi, who's been very involved with DrupalCon Europe so far and is also our treasurer. And two of our community elected board members, Leslie Glynn, and our newest member, Pedro Camara. So welcome, and we hope that this is going to be a very interactive session. We are hoping that you have lots of questions for us. And so we'll kind of open things up. Tim, I don't know if you can see what's coming in so far.
Yeah, I will kick things off. I want to remind everybody who is viewing us that there should be a live Q&A button in your toolbar for the session where you can ask those questions. It is community driven, so this is all about your questions. We have a few that we think are of interest that will kick things off so that you have a little time to get those typed in. But let's kick off with this one here. So this is a kind of a question about DrupalCon in general and in light of what's happened this year. So maybe for Audra and possibly Heather. So after having moved two DrupalCons at this point to fully virtual, fully remote events, do you think the future of what a DrupalCon is has changed? Are we going to carry with us something from these extraordinary versions of the event?
Interesting. Yeah. So Heather, do you want to start, or would you like me to?
I can give my thoughts quickly, and then you can tell me if I got it right, and if that's what we're actually going to do. So. You know, it's interesting. Even when we went through the first iteration of this, that we modeled as DrupalCon Global over the summer, I think what was really evident coming out of that was while people want to be together and will always strive to have an in-person event because there's so much importance of being together to meet the goals that we want to achieve, there was also a really nice increase in accessibility from doing a virtual event. So for everyone who, for whatever reason, can't attend an in-person event, having a virtual component is important. So coming out of the summer, I think it dawned on us as a team that there would always be ideally a virtual component of bringing people together, sharing information, contributing, and collaborating. We don't have a framework yet for exactly what that looks and feels like. I can tell you the initial idea of let's do in-person and virtual at the same time is a little daunting and overwhelming logistically. So that's something we haven't figured out yet. I don't think most people have figured out how to do that well. But I'm personally committed to bringing more opportunities for us outside of an in-person DrupalCon to get together. So it may be part of the in-person event. It may be interstitial. So between DrupalCons, is there an opportunity to use a virtual platform so we spend more time together and connect more often? So that's how I'm thinking about it. And then as a team, we're working through logistically how that might look and feel.
Yeah, I think I would just add, I think we all recognize the benefits of being together in person in real life, whether that's at a DrupalCon event or a local camp. I think it's, that it's kind of what we were born out of. And I think it is an important thing. But I've also been amazed at what we've been able to kind of accomplish virtually. And I don't think, kind of looking at other events and what's happening in the world, I don't think virtual events are going to go away. I think they're going to continue on and continue to mature and develop. And I think we'll probably continue to do that as well. But I think when it's safe to do so, we're going to want to find those opportunities to get back together where we can. So I think it's going to be a hybrid model going forward, a combination of in-person and virtual events. But, it's something that we're going to have to kind of see as we go. I think it's not something we have all the answers to right now.
Awesome. And we actually have a suggestion from the chat from Joseph that if we have ideas about scaling some online community events, there's a planned Drupal Global Contribution Weekend, January 29th to 31st, which might be an interesting place to think about how we can connect people online. Okay.
Cool.
So,
thanks, Joseph.
yeah, thank you for introducing yourselves. Please continue to do so for those who are newly joining us, and please go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A tab. Our next question is kind of a financial question, so maybe our treasurer, Batty, can answer this one. So following the Drupal Cares campaign earlier this year, and knowing that the ability to return to in-person events is still in question for next year, how strong is the DA's cash position and current resilience to what's going to happen next in sort of 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, so good question. And first of all, like maybe say thank you to everyone who participated in the Drupal Cares campaign. Because as maybe many of you know that in March, April, nobody knew what was going to happen. And there was going to be some kind of a DrupalCon happening. And we were really lucky that most of the sponsors, they stayed in, and we had already sold a lot of tickets. So that was also a big, help for the Drupal Association. But still, we didn't know what was going to go and happen after that. So getting the Drupal Cares in for the Drupal Association was crucial. We were fortunate that we didn't have to use that too much, like for the DrupalCon Global that happened. So we still have this as a secure fund in that sense to go forward now, both for us to use as we also don't know what is going to happen in 2021. I wish I could answer that. But there are still a lot of uncertainties. So I think the Drupal Association is in a good shape at the moment. So we are just finalizing also all of the budget for 2021. There's going to be a board meeting, I think, happening next week where we're going to be discussing that. So for the financial perspective, I think we are good now. At least we are in a good shape to continue what we are doing, which is extremely important because having that worry would be difficult for us. Yeah, so I also wanted to highlight that like all of our financials are always like they are published on Drupal.org under the Drupal Association. So if you are interested in like learning how everything is set up, and you can look at it on Drupal.org/association. I can post a link in where we publish all our financials, and the 2019 financials are in there as well. And we are going to do that also when the 2020 financials are done. And I think we're going to give an update also on the year after when the year is finished.
Wonderful. I'm going to go, I see some questions trickling in. I'm going to ask one more on this sort of community level. So Pedro, I'm hoping you can answer this as a new member of the community elected section of the board. During the Dries note, we talked about trying to achieve something like a 10x increase in contribution to Drupal. From your point of view as a contributor and someone who's getting in and seeing the board situation, the governance situation with fresh eyes, what do you think that will take from a community governance perspective, and what would the DA's role be in kind of fostering that?
Well, that's a curveball right there, isn't it? Increasing contribution is something that we've been like concerned about, I guess, from very beginning. I think there are really nice steps from the DA perspective. I think the infrastructure changes are going to foster that a lot. I can't really tell how many people have kind of complained about our current workflow, our old workflow of submitting patches to the issue queues. So the GitLab initiative, I think, is fantastic. I'm really happy about it. But I think in terms of community governance, I think there's a certain factor of letting also the community govern themselves. I think one of the amazing things we have about the Drupal community is that in some areas, or in many areas, especially community-driven areas, there's no lack of volunteers. There's a lot of people wanting to chime in and wanting to help. So I think there's a fantastic framework in the platform, and then we need to like trust people on being wanting to collaborate. I think just having an environment of trust, an environment of fostering collaboration will be like a primary goal.
Awesome. Great. So we have a question here from Angie that maybe I will tackle a little bit, which is, what does 2021 look like in terms of the Drupal.org improvements and kind of our roadmap for what comes next? So there's a few things that are on our mind for relatively early in the process. So one is something we've been talking about for a little while, but that's finally bubbling up to the top of our list, which is identity management using the Drupal.org account. Setting up sort of federated identity so that it can also be used perhaps for camp logins, for other community chat platforms and things like that, and that we can maybe even feed some data back that could be used in the contribution algorithm. Another really key area very early in 2021 is supporting the decoupled menus initiative and providing any additional tooling and features that are necessary to make JavaScript contribution a first-class citizen of the contributions that we're doing on Drupal.org. So those are definitely major components. We also want to do enhancements around some of the initiative organizing features and the contribution onboarding features. So I think that's going to be big. And then, of course, there's that all sorts of Drupal 9 migration preparations. So things like the identity management is actually a part of that roadmap as well. Looking at finishing community features so we can sunset groups, other different elements like that to start moving us in that direction. So yeah, lots of good things on the roadmap and further tooling improvements and things to make a contribution better. Another question we have here from Piyush is, when's the next opportunity for like a public input in a board meeting? So either a public board meeting or some other kind of public session for the board for the community to participate in with the board.
Yeah. Shall I take that? Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think we're trying to rethink the way that we're doing public board meetings and how we kind of the way that we have opportunities to kind of get input and discuss what's going on. I think 2020 has been very challenging from that perspective. Typically, we would have public board meetings at DrupalCons where we all meet in person and, you know, have a little lunch and have that opportunity. And I think we need to, and to be honest with you, I don't think that they've always been the most well attended, or that, you know, I think there's ways we can improve that. So we've been forced to a certain extent with, you know, going virtual, and also I think that because we're kind of recognize that there's room to improve, that we'd like to change that a little bit. And we've already started to do that to a certain extent, because what we had been calling public board meetings really had been very much focused on an executive director update, right? So updates from Heather, for example, which I know that there's been kind of more opportunities for that. There's been more published on Drupal.org, you know, in terms of updates and things like that. So that's happening a bit more proactively in terms of sharing that information. I think we're looking at our schedule for 2021 as a board. So when we're going to be meeting and trying to also lay out some opportunities where we will, you know, kind of open the door, so to speak, and have things that we want to talk about, but also give people an opportunity to bring stuff that they want to talk about as well. But I know one of the other, there's lots of things happening. So I guess there's executive director updates, there's us looking at the schedule. And then there's also, I know that Leslie, who's going to be who is heading up our community and governance committee, which Pedro is also joining. I think they're also going to be looking at the way that we communicate as a board publicly. So we're looking at maybe publishing a bit more on Drupal.org, for example, in terms of updates from the board where appropriate. So I think we've got a couple of things that are going on, a couple of ideas that are going on, but we don't have like a set schedule at this point. But if there's something in particular that you would like to see, you know, maybe a Q&A session that's like this, that's, you know, kind of between DrupalCons, or, you know, some other, you know, blog forum where people can engage, you know, let us know. And we're open to ideas and definitely want to have those avenues of communication. But be happy to hear from you if you've got specific ideas that you'd like to see us incorporate.
Awesome.
I think just to add on to that real quick, from if I bring in my outside of Drupal experience to this conversation, in thinking about the only input and export of communication being a once or twice a year board meeting, for the community is actually a disservice to the bigger picture. And so I think what really will work better over time from a community perspective would be, we list who the board members are, right? You can give input to board members at any time. You don't have to wait for an official board meeting. That exactly, they're really not even structured to be able to absorb that much communication the way that they're structured, right? So reach out to me, reach out to a board member and tell us what you're thinking. And if you can do that directly, that's even more useful, because we can have a conversation in a really meaningful way. And then as board members, part of what happens in that process is they bring that information to the board table so that we get those perspectives and that input and we can act on it more frequently. So I think it's a combination of that proactive communication and the board reaching out, not only to share what's happening, but the community reaching in and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, and not waiting for an official opportunity to do that. Because I think when we do, you just miss so much time in between things. So I really encourage people to kind of break out of the silo of I can only communicate during a board meeting, right? And so let's make sure we've got those open channels and that it's a lot of two-way communication all year long.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. I want to follow up on that a little bit, actually. So speaking of the dialogue between community and the board, and really, frankly, everybody on the board is part of this community. But Leslie, you are specifically our veteran community elected person on the board right now. So could you talk about what your term has been like so far, and what about the role of the community elected position might have surprised you, or where you saw some cool impacts in your term so far?
Sure, thanks, Tim. It was definitely a challenging year for me to be a member of the board. I learned a lot. It was an honor to work with, the board and the staff, a great group of people. They work really hard to get a lot done for the community. I was on the finance committee. So with all Drupal Cares, I know it's a great Drupal community is awesome. And I saw that even more in action with Drupal Cares. So that was all great. Thank you all for contributing to that, as Patty said. I was also on the community and governance committee. So I learned a lot more about local associations and things that I may not have personally been involved with prior. So there's a lot going on. There was a lot going on with Promote Drupal, the initiative. There was a lot of great community initiatives and things the community was doing in terms of documentation and contributions and diversity and inclusion. There's so much going on. So yeah, it was a great first year, learned a lot, and looking forward to this coming year.
Wonderful. And speaking of things to look forward to, Angie asks another great question. So Drupal is turning 20 in January. So have we thought about any special plans for a 20th birthday celebration, or special marketing activities or community activities? I think perhaps we kick this to Dries quickly first, just to, it's your child's birthday, yeah. But, and then we can get input from others about where to go here.
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I'm not sure if the Drupal Association is organizing something. I'll probably do a blog post and eat some ice cream and cake and stuff, but I don't know, through the lens of the Drupal Association, if we have anything planned.
I think Heather can speak to this.
Have we talked about it? Yeah. We've talked about it, right? And so, I think there are going to be a couple things coming. One is we would have liked to have had a lot more bandwidth to put a lot more time and resources into the 20th anniversary. And this was just a tough year to do that, but we're not going to let it go by without celebration. So I think this is where we really circle back with the community and talk to the community about how should we celebrate, right? So I would love to see a resurgence of Celebrate Drupal, which is that lovely online platform for everyone to upload their celebrations and to be seen. And I know we're using that again this week with DrupalCon Europ. I know there's an initiative out to do a sample timeline. Dries, you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. So there are community efforts popping up. I think the biggest initiative on the DA side is not to duplicate any community initiatives, but what can we do that would be unique? And so that's where we really look at from a press release angle, right? So working with Dries and trying to do more of a press release that is more of a business angle versus the community angle. I will say, I'm going to release a little bit of sneak peek info here that is not public, but you will definitely hear more about the 20th anniversary, not just in January, but we're going to be focused on it all year long. So we're treating it a little bit differently, and there will be a huge emphasis in April, and I will be able to tell everybody soon all about that, but just know that we are going to stretch out the celebration, give us lots of things to talk about really often. I'm going to work with people like Paul Johnson, who I saw was here, who's always great at thinking about marketing, not only from the end user perspective, but also from a community perspective. So it's really going to be a collaborative effort, but I encourage everybody to think of it as a 2021 year-long celebration of Drupal and not just January.
Awesome. Cake every week. Well, yeah, I do agree that the community can add a lot here. I mean, usually when we have these big celebrations, whether it's the release of Drupal 8 or 9 or whatever the big milestones are, we've seen incredible participation from people all around the world. And yeah, maybe what we need to do is like a call for celebration, and provide a platform to host or showcase a lot of the things that are happening, just like we did, as you said, Heather, with I guess DrupalCelebrate.org or whatever it was called. So yeah, in the past I've seen some amazing things. Like, so I love the idea of maybe encouraging creativity. I forgot what it was. Might have been the release of Drupal 7. I think it was in the Netherlands. They had programmed, just to give one example here, they had programmed the lights of a skyscraper alongside the highway so that the lights formed like a DrupalCon. That was pretty awesome. And so people have done some pretty remarkable things in the past. So yeah, it would be fun to see what people come up with.
Yeah, I have fond memories of the Drupal 8 celebrations because we had, I think we easily had more than 100 Drupal 8 celebration parties across the world, and we were represented on literally every continent, including Antarctica, because my in-laws were in Antarctica on a trip at the time, and we had a little Zoom party with them, or actually it was probably still Google Hangouts at that point with them for the Drupal 8 celebration. So we
did something with for Drupal 8 at Acquia. We you know how Batman shines the bat logo in the air? So we got one of these massive lights, and we created like a metal plate because it gets really hot, the shape of the Drupal 8 logo. And we literally went around the city and shined the Drupal logo on buildings and stuff, which is kind of fun.
Awesome.
Anyway.
Oh, that's awesome. If somebody sends me one, I'll shine it on my house all year. How about that?
All right, we'll get the Drupal signal. Okay.
Yes.
So another question here, Heather, you talked about in the Dries notes in your portion of the keynote about the Training and Talent Development Initiative and about the value of increasing diverse voices in the Drupal community. Can you talk a little bit more about that initiative? And I guess what's interesting to me and hopefully to our audience is how you go from zero to program when we talk about a new Drupal Association kind of initiative.
I'll tell you, this is not unique how this came about, and I think it's just indicative of how our community works, but this was a community-driven idea. So just about this time last year, a group of community members, all of whom are involved in training, Drupal training now, came to me and said, hey, we know that there's been a lot of discussion about diversity and inclusion. We've been wanting to do some kind of coordinated training program. Is there an opportunity to combine those two ideas? And so I had the opportunity to work with Mike and Gwendolyn at Drupal Easy as kind of spearheading the idea. And so really, I think what works about it is it's a collaboration of training organizations who already have the expertise about how to deliver Drupal training. I can tell you, I had no desire for the DA to try to replicate Drupal training or to create some kind of curriculum that needed to be blessed across the world. That just wasn't going to be a reasonable opportunity. So we did a call out earlier this year and said, hey, we want any training organization, and we had a few criteria around kind of stackable skills and how much training you had and your ability to offer it on a global perspective. And we actually had 3 training organizations raise their hand to be part of this pilot. And so the next step was, hey, we need some volunteer support, because what happened was the resources I was hoping to allocate to this had to go away as part of our restructuring in relation to COVID-19. We could have put it on the back burner and said, we'll wait to do this when we get resources. But this is where my personal passion around STEM education and diversity and inclusion came in, and I just wasn't willing to let that happen. So on my team, our finance director and I are actually stepping in, and I would call it overtime, but it's all overtime at this point. The energy that we put at, Tim's laughing, like, what's a normal schedule? But Angie and I have taken on the staff, moving this forward as staff members and really putting the program together, but it's a collaborative thing. So we've got Allison Manley at Canopy Studios, who volunteered to be our program manager because we don't have a staff person that can focus on it. We've actually got a nice body of volunteer opportunities for people who'd like to join us. We want to get the ball rolling, right? And so we're really hoping to be able to launch in the first quarter of 2021, and that's going to take some volunteer help. But the trainers are putting together what that pathway looks like. So we're targeting anywhere from a 12 to 18 month journey for the students that are recruited into this program. And then we want to have rolling cycles of cohorts so that, the idea is eventually you have cohorts running. We've got training organizations that represent us globally. We've got students that are represented globally. And, maybe what we're hoping is in a few years, could we be graduating 100 or more new members of our Drupal community with the talent to be able to get a junior level developer job who've been mentored in Drupal. Part of the program is being a contributor. So getting them through learning how to do contribution and then helping, just really helping them both from their STEM professional perspective, but, bringing new people into Drupal. So I think what really, what it looks like in the background is it's been a lot of stop and start, because when you think about, we've got training organizations and volunteers helping us do this, everybody's had a tough year, right? But I'm really appreciative of the group of people that came together and said, we're really passionate about pushing this through. And I think that, we've developed the Drupal Talent and Education umbrella, of which this talent development initiative is one piece. There are discussions in the works with end user Drupal organizations that want to see us help coordinate internship programs so that we really get more traction around Drupal from a higher education perspective at the student level. There's so much opportunity, but just like the way this program came about, if you're out there and you're part of our community and you have an idea and you're willing to help us figure out how to put it together, reach out, because that's how we get these things going and moving. And I think that's really important, that those of you who know how to do this and do it well from a talent perspective, help us determine kind of what's next on that roadmap.
I think it's a really good story, and it's a really good place to have that impact, because being at the front end of the career journey for new people in the Drupal sphere can be really helpful. I see folks in our chat talking about this as well. Often people in open source are self-taught, and being able to point to, I have this internship opportunity, or I have this contribution history, or I have these other things are the new kind of resume for a lot of these roles, and can be enormously helpful for folks. Great. So let's see here. Another question I have was inspired by a name I saw in the chat. Don't know who this question is for, about, a lot of when I look at the supporting partner list on Drupal.org, I see primarily, of course, Drupal shops and agencies and hosting partners, but I see a few names of Drupal end users or other large organizations that have a commitment either to Drupal specifically or the open web in general, right? So we see large organizations like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and Google and other folks who feel there's a worthy investment in Drupal to support the open web and other needs. What is our thinking about growing that kind of set of connections in those spaces, either end users or sort of larger technology and web firms? Anybody particularly inspired?
I can start. I mean, I think it would be really cool to grow those relationships, right? I mean, there is dozens and dozens, hundreds of organizations that are spending, frankly, millions a year on their Drupal sites, between employee, expenses and hosting expenses. I mean, there's hundreds of organizations spending millions a year on Drupal. And I think it would be wise to have a relationship with them, to talk to them, to understand what their needs are and what the DA can do to help them be successful. So I'm all for it personally. I think the challenge historically has been for the DA to build the relationships with these organizations because, typically they work with other Drupal companies, not the DA, right, in terms of building these sites or managing all of these sites. And I think to get their involvement, or, you have to have that relationship. And maybe that's something that the DA can, work on together with the different supporting partners to build these relationships, and to have joint programs or offerings to these companies. Just putting on my Acquia hat for a second here, like if there was something that we could bundle in what we sell to our customers, we may want to do it, like if that was an interesting thing to do for us, why wouldn't we? And so, yeah, something that we should think about, I guess.
Some opportunity too for us to, Dree's kind of latching on to your example. Can we work more closely with supporting partners so that when you do start a new project or a new client, part of their onboarding into Drupal is an opportunity to connect with the Drupal Association and see how else we can support what they're trying to accomplish while also supporting the organization that brought them to the table. So, maybe that's around contribution enablement, or maybe that's around some of what we're doing around talent, but are there opportunities for us to have more of that partnership, like you mentioned? And, there are things that we'll bring to the table from a support perspective that might help keep clients interested in Drupal long term, right? So it's good for the clients and it's good for the agencies, right? So is there a way we can have more of a sticky factor with end users because there are more of us that are interacting with them and offering things that are important to them as well? Because frankly, a lot of the talent discussion is happening with large end users, right? And so that's another reason for us to really lean into the talent and education piece, even outside of diversity and inclusion, is talent is a huge need for these end user organizations. And this is kind of the carrot to get a lot of them interested in Drupal community versus just Drupal technology. And so that's something that we're hoping to be able to do as well.
Yeah. And I think there's probably some packages, if you want, that we can that are not competitive with the ecosystem, right? Because I think that's part of the challenge sometimes. But like maybe it's open source training, or maybe it's, make your first contribution training that maybe the agencies or the hosting vendors aren't currently really focused on, but it would be easy for them to put on the menu, so to speak, of things to choose from.
I know that we had a successful instance of that with some of the Johnson & Johnson team. They wanted to, because, development teams find it motivating to give back, to be able to participate in open source wherever they are, whatever organization they work at. And so they brought us in for a little while to do a couple seminars about Drupal open source contribution. This was a year and a half ago or something like that. And that was a good experience, and one that would be great to replicate. A good follow-up question in here, coming from Paul, is perhaps if we are trying to deepen these connections with end user organizations, is there some kind of equivalent event, or maybe event within DrupalCon or something, that could be totally end user focused, so that it doesn't have that kind of agency perspective, exclusively anyway.
Can I ask to that? When you're talking about an end user, are you then talking about somebody who is then actually developing Drupal themselves? And that's a little bit the question, because, how I see it from an agency perspective, like many of our clients as end users, they are just using Drupal and they are just happy to use Drupal, and they are not that involved in Drupal. But then there are other companies that we're working with that are heavily involved in Drupal, right? So the examples that you were mentioning before, maybe Tim, being Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, they have their own development teams, right? So I think there are two personas that we're talking about here. One is just being the end user who may not necessarily know that they're using Drupal in that sense. Of course they do. But then there is the end user who is actually very involved.
Paul? And he's thinking of it as clients, as end users.
And Micah adds, and I think this goes to your point, Batty, would the other type of end user, or would that type of end user attend? Would they know to attend? Would they even be aware of the event? These are all, I think, interesting questions.
I think we've tested that out a little bit with the executive summits in the past.
In Seattle, was one in particular.
Yeah.
Sorry, Betty, you were going to say?
I think, so if I think about it's a little bit of the responsibility of us agencies or service providers who are working with the end user, being either that we are working with the development team or we are working with just them as a client. I think it is a little bit of our responsibility. And if we are, at the moment, we are also too few that are actually really contributing to Drupal. So I think that we could actually start by educating the supporting partners of the Drupal Association and those who are involved, and actually get, it took way too long for us as a company to become like part of the community and start contributing. And I think there are very many, we heard this in many buffs and sessions now in DrupalCon Europ this week, where people have been saying, like, how can I get involved? I don't know, like I can't just open up this issue queue and start working, and I don't have time to be on Drupal Slack too. So how do I do that? Like, how do I as an agency start being involved? And I think the Drupal Association can help there with the programs that you were talking about, Heather. And maybe we could do events where we actually, where we go through these things, like how did this company do it? And we get maybe Owen from Previous Next to come and talk about how they did it and so on. That could be helpful.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we talk about a lot internally, right? I think we've taken for granted people know exactly what to do and they're either choosing to do it or not. And what we're learning, or at least what I'm learning in a lot of conversations, is it may just be confusion or they need one more step to get where they want to go. But I can tell you part of what was really important in looking at the certified Drupal partner program was the piece of it that says, now how do we coach everybody else to be able to get there too, right? And so this coaching concept that you just talked about, Batty, which is how do we help everybody contribute in the meaningful way that they want to be contributing and not take for granted that they know how. And we need to provide more tools and resources for them.
I think
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's part of, the conversation we've been having about trying to increase contribution is also around elevating makers and encouraging more makers, right? And so all those things are tied together, very much focused on that. What were you going to say, Dries? I
was going to say that I think it's really important that we bring those people to the community, let's say, and make them part of our events. The other reason why is because they're increasingly more the decision maker. There's been a shift away from technical decision makers to end user decision makers in our industry. And if they're not in our events, they're not going to be excited. And I can tell you, I have brought some of Acquia's customers to DrupalCon, and Pfizer and J&J actually were great examples of that. And they literally walk into the keynote venue and they're like, wow, this is awesome. I want to be part of this. So they have the same kind of excitement when they see Drupal as developers. Maybe they start to zone out a little bit when they hear all the technical content, but I can tell you it's really reassuring for customers and end users to see that we have a vibrant and thriving community. So they actually love being part of our events, is my experience. Just need to have a little bit more of a program for them and obviously we're making great progress on that. But so anyway, I think it's really important for many reasons.
Yeah. There's an interesting related question, and I think we're going to have time for probably 2 more questions. So I'll ask this one, and if our audience would like to post any thoughts for a final question, I'll try and choose one out of what we get. But this question is from Clara: how do we become known to companies, how does Drupal in particular become known to companies that are looking at the Gartner and Forrester reports that right now, for the most part, don't do an open source matrix? They tend to do a commercial service matrix. Is there an opportunity to create the open source version of the Gartner report? Is there, like, what's our best way to break into that so that people know where to look to find these open source opportunities like Drupal?
I mean, I can give you a perspective. Again, I feel like I'm wearing my Acquia hat, but we have tried as Acquia to put Drupal on the Magic Quadrant versus Acquia, and they just won't do it because they have very strict criteria for what kinds of organizations can even qualify. So there's like revenue minima and these kinds of things. So it's really, in this case, Gartner and Forrester and other analysts that have to change the way they work. And all we can do is try to explain to them why they have to change their criteria. But there's a lot of easy, I guess, for them to make those changes.
Yeah.
Or they're reluctant to. I mean, I don't know if it's useful to have our own kind of Gartner. I mean, I think the reason why Gartner and Forrester and others are so valuable is because they have spent many, many years building a really strong brand and reputation, and they spent a lot of resources building these reports. So it's not something you can very quickly replicate and then have the same kind of trustworthiness, So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem here, but
yeah. I wonder myself if, because you're absolutely right, it would be hard to create something from nothing, but if a combination of the OSI and the Linux Foundation, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and some of the more major associations and the Drupal Association and open source got together, perhaps we could start to break into that, but it's hard to know. Or perhaps that group together could go to one of those organizations with the reputation and maybe have enough clout to change their minds.
The other thing to realize is if you put Drupal, let's say Gartner would put Drupal in their Magic Quadrants, Drupal on its own probably wouldn't rank very well because we would be benchmarked against other organizations that have all these capabilities that don't come with Drupal, like hosting as an example, right? And so you have to think about, even if we could, would we want it, would we rank well? Because, it could be better not to be on the ranking than to be on the ranking with a lower ranking, Anyway, so they really need to create an open source version that excludes all of these things like hosting and additional capabilities that come from vendors. That would be our best.
Certainly those reports are useful, I think, for some people making decisions, but there are lots of other things that are in our control in terms of how we talk about Drupal, how we communicate. And I think there's a lot of, kind of improvement and change that we're looking at in terms of Drupal.org, for example, about how what does the front page look like? How easy is it to adopt and use? We're looking at a lot of things that we have control over that we think are going to really help both raise awareness, but also improve consideration. So, there's things that we can control, I think, from the Drupal Association, from Drupal.org. But then I think there's other work that has to be done, kind of on a community level among the agencies as well. So there's, it's not just about those reports.
Yeah,
I would say.
Well,
with that, Audra, I mean, there's so much low-hanging fruit for us. Like, these reports are hard to get into. Like, it's not like, you have to spend days and days working with them. But yeah, like just basic product marketing. It's hard to find just basic information about Drupal in great detail with videos and like compelling. So I think that's going to have a much bigger impact than trying to get into the analyst reports.
Cool. Well, we have a short amount of time. I think we can probably run over a minute here. So rather than another question, I'd just like to spin it back to Audra, perhaps, as our chair, to wrap us up, maybe reflect on where we've been and where we're going. And thank you all for your questions.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today and for your questions. I know there's probably more questions than we had time to answer. It would be great if we could kind of gather some of those things up and see if there's ways for us to, maybe answer them and communicate back in other ways, maybe on Drupal.org on the blog or otherwise through the newsletter, perhaps. I think, one of the things that I really am excited about, I think, for this year is the work that we're doing around increasing contribution, enabling contribution, and all the things that are related to that around talent pipeline and things like that. And I hope that, if any of the stuff that you've heard about that the Drupal Association is working on, you're interested in, you're not already involved in, you're not already, kind of in those conversations, please let us know, because I think as you probably heard from Heather and Dries during the Dries note, there are lots of opportunities for people to plug in the areas that they're really passionate about, because what we know, we have a very small team. We've got really amazing, huge plans with our strategy this year, and the way that we think we're going to be successful is by really kind of collaborating and getting people plugged in the areas where they want to help. So if you've heard anything around contribution enablement, talent pipeline, and elevating makers, any of those things, please get in touch with us, because I think we would love to kind of have you involved. So thank you very much.
Seeing a product marketing group forming in the chat that I'd love to work with about next steps, right?
Promote Drupal.
It goes back to, let's don't stop because the DA doesn't have the resources. Let's collaborate for everyone that's interested and excited, and let's move it forward. So
Absolutely.
Call me.
That's exciting, yeah.
Right.
It's so
Thanks,
doable
everyone.
too. It's all very doable, which is a great news.
Wonderful.
And with that, I think we're out of time, but thank you again, everybody, for attending. And I hope you'll keep in touch. All these people's names are on the site. You can reach out. We love to look forward to speaking with you. All right. Goodbye.
And come over to the closing session.
Yes.
Come over there.
You there.
All right. See you over there.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.